Armed security rolled up to my vineyard at dawn, guns visible, barking orders to demolish my tasting room right now. 3 of them stormed straight down my Cabernet rows, boots crushing clusters of near-perfect grapes that were 2 weeks from harvest. Diesel fumes from their black tactical truck choked the morning air that's supposed to smell like sugar and earth. One guard never took his hand off his holster while shoving immediate removal papers in my face. I'm Marcus Finley. My grandfather planted these vines in 1943, when this whole valley was cattle ranches. My 12 acres have never been part of any subdivision, never signed a single HOA rule in 81 years. Their president, Delilah Thornfield, decided my tasting room violates aesthetics and sent hired muscle to enforce it. Big mistake. She just declared war on the wrong family, the wrong legacy, and the wrong piece of California soil. Today she learns what happens when you bring guns to a vineyard that's been here since World War II. Justice is about to be poured, vintage style, and it's going to sting. Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments. I'm reading every single one. 3 weeks before those armed thugs crushed my harvest grapes, I was living the dream my grandfather died trying to build. I'm Marcus Finley, third-generation vintner on 12 acres of Sonoma County gold that my grandfather bought with blood money, his Purple Heart discharge pay from Iwo Jima in 1943. This valley was nothing but cattle ranches and broken dreams back then. Now it's tech millionaire mansions and people who think Kendall Jackson is boutique wine. My grandfather planted the original Cabernet Sauvignon vines with hands that still shook from artillery shells. My dad expanded into Chardonnay during the wine boom of the 70s. I've spent 15 years perfecting both, building our reputation as one of the valley's last family operations that actually gives a damn about quality over profit. Our current harvest, 2 weeks from completion, was valued at $180,000. Not Napa stupid money, but enough to keep great-grandfather's dream alive and send my daughter Zoe to UC Davis for agricultural science. She wants to revolutionize sustainable viticulture. Smart kid. Gets that from her mother. Speaking of whom, my wife Sarah runs our business side when she's not managing agricultural loans at the credit union. She knows every farm family's financial secrets in 3 counties, which makes her dangerous and invaluable in equal measure. The tasting room they wanted demolished? I built that masterpiece in 2019 after 3 years of county bureaucracy hell. Reclaimed redwood beams older than most of these subdivision houses, locally quarried stone foundation, solar panels generating enough power to run 2 households. It's where we host wine club events, conduct restaurant tastings, and throw harvest parties that turn neighbors into family. October mornings smell like heaven if you grew up breathing fermentation. Sweet grape sugar mixing with morning fog, earth that's fed 4 generations of vines, the metallic tang of crush equipment ready for another vintage. That's the smell of honest work paying off. Then, the devil moved in next door. Delilah Thornfield bought the biggest obscenity in Grandview Estates, a $3.2 million monument to tasteless excess, built on what used to be the Morrison Cattle Ranch. Fake Mediterranean McMansion, complete with a temperature-controlled wine cellar she stocked with Trader Joe's bottles. This woman drove a white Tesla with vanity plates reading WINELVR, despite knowing less about wine than my 17-year-old daughter. Former Beverly Hills real estate vampire who cashed out and moved north to embrace authentic wine country living. 6 months later, she convinced enough transplant neighbors to elect her HOA president on a platform of protecting investments against rural decline. Translation: eliminate anything that reminded her she'd moved next to actual working farms. First assault. My John Deere tractors were industrial eyesores, disrupting residential tranquility. She actually demanded I schedule all vineyard operations around her morning yoga and evening meditation routines. Second escalation. Harvest noise complaints. Starting equipment at 6 a.m., completely legal for agricultural operations, was inconsiderate to neighbors seeking peaceful retirement. Lady, you move next to a working vineyard. That's like buying oceanfront property, then complaining about wave sounds. Then she declared war on my family's livelihood, demanded I demolish my tasting room because its barn-style architecture was incompatible with neighborhood aesthetics and harmful to property values. The crushing irony? She lived 800 yards away and needed binoculars to see my buildings from her kitchen window. But Sarah's credit union training makes her paranoid about unusual property inquiries, and her digging revealed the real motivation. I'd rejected 2 below-market purchase offers from shell companies in the past year, both connected to Valley Vista Development Corp., both contingent on agricultural zoning changes. Guess who'd been asking county assessors about converting farmland to residential development? Our beloved neighbor, the wine-loving real estate expert, who wanted my grandfather's legacy bulldozed for subdivision profits. The rough bark of century-old vine trunks under my hands every morning reminded me why we fight for family land. Some roots run deeper than money, deeper than some transplant's twisted idea of neighborhood improvement. But that peaceful routine was about to become a battlefield, because Delilah Thornfield had just picked a fight with the wrong Marine's family legacy. Thornfield's first real attack arrived in my mailbox like a rattlesnake in a gift box. Cease and desist. Commercial operations in residential zone. Thick legal letterhead from something called Prestige Property Partners, designed to make honest people wet their pants and sign whatever they're told. The letter claimed my wine delivery trucks violated residential traffic restrictions and demanded I stop all commercial activities within 72 hours. They were threatening to block my harvest, 2 weeks before $180,000 of perfect fruit needed picking. Sarah read over my shoulder while my coffee turned to acid in my mouth. They copied the state alcohol board, she said, pointing to the CC line, making it look official, like you're some kind of criminal. The morning fog rolling through my vineyard rows felt different that day, heavier, like storm clouds gathering over fruit that had survived everything nature could throw at it, only to face destruction from lawyers with clipboards. I drove straight to Jack Patterson's office, the agricultural attorney who'd guided us through 3 years of tasting room permit hell. Jack took one look at the letterhead and burst out laughing. "Marcus, you beautiful bastard. They just handed you a legal machine gun," he said, pulling out my property deed. Those yellowed pages smelled like old leather and family sweat. "Your grandfather was apparently smarter than any of us knew." Jack pointed to a paragraph I'd never bothered reading. Something about agricultural preservation easement that sounded like bureaucratic gibberish. Turns out, it was legal gold. Back when my grandfather bought this land with his Purple Heart pay, some forward-thinking lawyer had included language protecting agricultural operations from future development pressure. "I've seen the Right to Farm Act protect plenty of farmers from neighbor complaints," Jack explained. "But this easement language makes you untouchable. Any court in California would laugh this case out in 5 minutes." That's when Jack dropped the bomb that changed everything. He recognized Prestige Property Partners from his case files, same law firm that had systematically converted every family farm in 3 counties into subdivision developments. The Rodriguez Dairy became Sunset Hills Estate. The Kowalski Apple Orchard turned into Orchard View Manor. Always the same pattern. Legal harassment escalating until families sold cheap just to escape the nightmare. "Here's what's really going to piss you off," Jack said, pulling out a thick folder. "Prestige doesn't work for individual HOA presidents. They work for development companies with 8-figure budgets. Your neighbor isn't just harassing you for fun. Somebody's paying her to terrorize your family." The afternoon sunlight streaming through Jack's office windows suddenly felt cold as winter. I needed the familiar comfort of my vines, the honest smell of earth and growing things. Back home, I found Sarah by the crush pad, where our stainless steel fermentation tanks reflected the sky like mirrors showing the future. "Called the Homeowners Association," she said. "Their president remembers identical campaigns against 3 other family wineries. All of them sold within 18 months. The association had developed template responses specifically for harassment campaigns. Apparently, organized attacks on family farms were common enough to need form letters. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice carrying that tone she uses when delivering news that's going to ruin my day. "Pulled Thornfield's property records while you were gone. She's been meeting with county planners about development feasibility studies for our entire section." The sound of wind chimes from my tasting room porch seemed to mock my stupidity. I'd thought this was about aesthetics and property values. Turns out my family legacy was standing between some development company and their next $100 million subdivision project. Jack's response letter to Prestige Property Partners was basically a legal middle finger wrapped in lawyer language. Cited agricultural protection laws, easement rights, and threw in some creative threats about malicious prosecution just to keep things entertaining. but his warning sobered me up fast. This is just the opening move. Harassment campaigns follow predictable escalation patterns. Government agencies, property disputes, health department complaints. The goal is making your life so miserable you'll take any buyout offer just to make the pain stop. The rough bark of my grandfather's original vines felt like a promise under my hands that evening. These roots had survived the Depression, multiple droughts, and market crashes that killed other family operations. They'd survived my grandfather's war nightmares and my father's midlife crisis and my own struggles to keep the legacy alive. Standing in rows planted with Purple Heart money, watching sunset turn my vineyard gold, I made a decision that would have made my grandfather proud and probably given my wife nightmares. If Delilah Thornfield and her development company Puppeteers wanted to turn family legacy into subdivision profits, they picked the wrong Marine's grandson to terrorize. They were about to learn that some things can't be bought, bullied, or legal briefed into submission. The war for my family's soul was just beginning, and I intended to win it. Thornfield's response to Jack's legal beatdown was swift, vicious, and absolutely unhinged. Within 72 hours, I had 3 government agencies swarming my vineyard like locusts on perfect fruit. County Health Department arrived first, claiming anonymous reports of unsanitary wine production. State Alcohol Board followed, investigating unlicensed public events. Code enforcement rolled up last, demanding inspection of unpermitted agricultural structures. The coordinated assault had military precision. Sarah and I spent entire days babysitting inspectors who measured everything twice and documented violations that didn't exist. Bill Rodriguez from Health Department pulled me aside after his compliance check. 30-year veteran who'd seen every scam in California. On Marcus, your operation's cleaner than most hospital kitchens, he said, leaving his clipboard in the truck. But that neighbor lady's called 6 times this month with increasingly insane complaints. The latest report claimed my wine barrels were hazardous waste storage containers. Either Thornfield had never seen a wine barrel, or she was deliberately filing false reports to create a harassment paper trail. State Inspector Jennifer Torres was even more direct. Your licenses are perfect, records immaculate, facility exceeds every standard we have, she said. But someone's been conducting professional surveillance of your property. That's when she showed me the photos that made my blood run cold. Detailed telephoto shots of my equipment, fermentation tanks, even my truck's license plates, all taken from outside my property over 3 weeks. Professional quality, time-stamped, comprehensive documentation of my entire operation. This isn't neighbor complaints, Jennifer explained. This is intelligence gathering for a lawsuit or insurance claim. Someone's building a case against you. The thought of hired investigators lurking in shadows while I worked my grandfather's vines made my skin crawl. But it also triggered something deeper, Marine Corps training about responding to enemy reconnaissance. Time for my own intelligence operation. I called my buddy Jake Morrison, county deputy sheriff and fellow Marine, who understood that when enemies gather intelligence, you gather it right back. Jake arrived that evening in his personal truck, bringing equipment that definitely wasn't standard sheriff's department issue. Surveillance goes both ways, Jake said, setting up motion-activated cameras along my property line. Let's see who's watching you, and let's document every second of it. Meanwhile, Sarah had been conducting her own investigation, using credit union databases and public records. Her discovery changed everything. Prestige Property Partners billed Thornfield $18,000 last month, Sarah announced, spreading bank statements across our kitchen table. The papers smelled like fresh ink and impending legal warfare. But here's the kicker. Valley Vista Development Corp. reimbursed her for the legal fees 3 days later. The money trail was clear. Development company paying for harassment campaign through HOA president proxy. Classic money laundering to hide corporate involvement in systematic farm destruction. But Sarah found something even more explosive. Thornfield's been meeting with county planners about rezoning our entire section from agricultural to residential development. Pre-application meetings for a 400-unit subdivision project. The evening air felt thick with more than autumn humidity. Antonio Rossetti called an emergency meeting at Vine and Dine. Every restaurant owner, wine distributor, and farm family in 3 counties crowding into his dining room that still smelled like roasted garlic and honest cooking. "They're not just targeting Marcus," Antonio declared, his Brooklyn accent cutting through the worried murmur. "This is systematic destruction of family agriculture. If they break the strongest operation first, the rest fall like dominoes." The wine distributor had terrifying intel. Valley Vista Development held purchase options on 12 family farms throughout the valley. Same harassment pattern every time. Legal pressure, regulatory attacks, families selling below market just to escape the nightmare. 3 wineries in 18 months, he reported. All prime development land now. All facing identical complaint campaigns before they sold. That's when I realized Thornfield had made her first major tactical error. By using government agencies to harass me, she'd created official documentation of her false complaints. Every fraudulent report, every fabricated violation, every malicious inspection request, all documented in government files, with her name attached. I stood up in Antonio's dining room, surrounded by 3 generations of family farmers and restaurant owners who understood what was at stake. They want to document my operation? Perfect. Let's document theirs. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of prep cooks cleaning up after dinner service. "Jack Patterson's filing complaints with every agency Thornfield contacted," I announced. "Filing false reports is a misdemeanor. Conspiracy to file false reports is a felony. And using government agencies to harass legitimate businesses, that's federal civil rights violation territory." The metallic taste of adrenaline replaced the fear that had been poisoning my sleep for weeks. My grandfather survived Japanese artillery to plant these vines. I'd survived Afghanistan to protect them. Some real estate vampire wasn't going to destroy family legacy with paperwork and hired surveillance. Thornfield wanted a war of documentation and government pressure. She was about to get one, and she was going to learn that Marines don't retreat. We advance in different directions. The hunt was about to become the hunted. Thornfield's boundary warfare assault began at dawn, with the sound that still gives me nightmares. Heavy machinery destroying something irreplaceable. I woke to the metallic clang of surveyor stakes being driven into soil that had fed my family for 3 generations. Orange flags sprouted between my Cabernet rows like cancer, marking territory some hired gun claimed belonged to Grandview Estates HOA. The surveyor hammering stakes 20 feet inside my actual property line looked nervous as hell when I approached. Kid couldn't have been older than Zoe, wearing a hard hat that screamed, "First job out of college." "What the hell are you doing to my vineyard?" I demanded, morning fog still clinging to grape clusters that were 8 days from perfect harvest sugar levels. The paperwork he handed me was thick, official, and designed to terrify. Emergency boundary correction. Precision Land Surveying Services. According to their new survey, 2 acres of my best Cabernet vines were supposedly encroaching on HOA common area. 2 acres. $150,000 of mature vines that took 7 years to reach peak production. Irreplaceable genetic heritage from rootstock my grandfather selected by hand. The demand letter arrived before lunch. Remove all unauthorized vegetation within 72 hours, or face immediate enforcement action, including mechanical removal. They were threatening to bulldoze my harvest-ready vines in the middle of crush season. Sarah found me standing among the threatened rows that evening. Autumn air, heavy with the sweetness of grapes approaching perfection, and the diesel exhaust from surveying equipment. "They picked the worst possible timing," I said, touching bark that had weathered 79 California seasons. "Or the best timing from their perspective," Sarah replied, holding a folder that smelled like fresh photocopies and legal warfare. "Force you to choose between fighting and losing your harvest." But Sarah's credit union paranoia had turned her into a research weapon. "Called Mrs. Rodriguez at County Records. She remembers your grandfather's original survey from 1943, complete with hand-drawn maps and witness statements from neighboring cattle ranchers. The original boundary documentation was clear as mountain water. The disputed vines stood exactly where they'd always belonged, well within our property lines. Here's the kicker," Sarah continued, satisfaction warming her voice. "Researched Precision Land Surveying's credentials. They're licensed for residential work only. Can't legally conduct agricultural boundary disputes without specialized certification they don't have." That's when I learned something that could save any property owner thousands in legal fees. Boundary disputes involving agricultural land require surveyors with specific state certification, and property owners can verify credentials through licensing boards before accepting any survey claims. The next morning, I hired Carlos Martinez from Martinez Land Services, the surveyor who'd handled our tasting room permits and knew every inch of this valley since before Thornfield existed. Carlos took one look at Precision's work and started laughing. "Marcus, this is embarrassing," he said, checking GPS coordinates against his tablet. "Their measurements are off by 30 feet in places. Either they're incompetent or they're deliberately falsifying boundaries for money." But Carlos's real survey revealed the mini twist that shifted the entire war. "Want to hear something beautiful?" Carlos asked, pointing toward Thornfield's property with equipment that actually worked. "Your neighbor's fancy entrance gate sits 8 feet into county right-of-way. Pool house violates agricultural buffer requirements by 12 feet. That prize-winning rose garden? Completely on public easement land. County ordinances required 15-foot setbacks from roadways and agricultural properties. Thornfield's violations would cost over $40,000 to correct, assuming the county allowed correction instead of demanding complete removal. Gets better," Carlos continued, pulling up the HOA subdivision plat. 3 acres of their community green space were never properly surveyed or legally transferred from county ownership. Half their common area is still public land they have no right to claim. The smell of grape sugar reaching perfect levels, mixed with the bitter scent of legal documents as Carlos documented every violation. While Thornfield tried to steal my vineyard, she'd exposed massive property fraud in her own development. That afternoon, Jack Patterson filed complaints with the State Surveying Board about Precision's illegal boundary work. Fraudulent surveys, conducted by improperly certified companies, carried professional sanctions and personal liability for damages. "Here's justice served cold," Jack explained, while I stood among vines that had survived everything California could throw at them. "We're filing enforcement demands for immediate removal of Thornfield's illegal structures, using the exact same language they used against you. See how she likes 72-hour demolition notices." The evening light filtering through grape clusters seemed golden with possibility, and sweet with approaching victory. Thornfield had tried to weaponize property law against my family legacy. Instead, she'd handed me ammunition to destroy her own illegal empire. My grandfather planted these vines with discharge pay and war-torn hands. I defended them through drought, recession, and now legal warfare. Some transplant HOA queen wasn't going to steal family heritage with fake surveys and bulldozer threats. Time to show Delilah Thornfield what happens when you bring property fraud to a Marine's family vineyard that's been fighting off invaders since 1943. The financial earthquake that cracked open Thornfield's entire criminal operation hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah had been documenting every harassment incident with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 15 years processing agricultural loans and recognizing financial fraud. What started as defensive record-keeping became the smoking gun that exposed a conspiracy worth millions. "I filed public records requests for all HOA financial documents," Sarah announced, spreading bank statements across our kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial. "Took 3 weeks to get everything, but holy shit, Marcus, this is bigger than we thought." The numbers made my hands shake. Grandview Estates HOA carried $485,000 in debt, enough to destroy any homeowner community, let alone fund an harassment campaign against neighboring farms. But the money trail told a story that made my Marine Corps training and recognizing enemy infiltration look like child's play. Premium Property Solutions had received over $200,000 in landscaping contracts from HOA funds, pool maintenance for pools that didn't exist, security services for decorative gates, landscape design for common areas that were never landscaped. Premium Property Solutions was owned by Delilah Thornfield. "She's been embezzling HOA money to fund her own harassment campaigns," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the cold fury of someone who'd discovered systematic theft. "Using homeowner dues to pay legal fees, surveyor fraud, and private security to terrorize neighboring families." My coffee tasted like ashes as Sarah revealed the true scope of Valley Vista Development Corp's agricultural destruction machine. Cross-referencing property records and development applications had uncovered a conspiracy spanning 3 counties and 16 family farms. Rodriguez Dairy sold for 60% below market value after 18 months of legal hell. Sarah read from her spreadsheet that smelled like fresh ink and approaching justice. Kowalski Apple Orchard went for 50% below assessment. Morrison Cattle Ranch, now Thornfield Subdivision, sold for 40% of actual worth. The timeline was horrifying in its precision. Systematic destruction of generational agriculture through coordinated legal warfare, followed by conversion to luxury developments worth 10 times the distressed purchase prices. My vineyard represented the crown jewel, $3 million of prime development land that could be forced into distressed sale for under $1 million. $2 million profit after development costs, split between Valley Vista and their local enforcer. Thornfield's promised cut for delivering my family legacy, $300,000 in consulting fees, plus ongoing management contracts. Blood money for destroying neighbors she'd never met to solve financial problems she'd created through embezzlement. But Sarah's most devastating discovery was buried in HOA insurance policy exclusions. Language that made Thornfield personally liable for every crime she'd committed in our name. Coverage specifically excludes enforcement actions beyond legal jurisdiction, Sarah read, satisfaction warming her voice like aged whiskey. Every harassment incident, every false complaint, every fraudulent survey, she's personally liable with zero insurance protection. The insurance company had already been notified. Every threat against my family was documented harassment for which Thornfield faced total personal liability and potential federal charges. The sweet aroma of 6 days to harvest grapes drifted through kitchen windows as the full scope hit me like artillery fire. This wasn't neighbor harassment. This was organized agricultural terrorism disguised as community governance. Thornfield wasn't just stealing my land. She was the local executioner for a development conspiracy that had already murdered dozens of family farms throughout wine country, turning century-old agricultural heritage into suburban sprawl and corporate profits. My grandfather survived Japanese bullets to plant these vines. Families like the Rodriguez and Kowalski had lost their legacies to this same systematic destruction. Every vine they'd bulldozed, every family they'd bankrupted, every heritage farm they'd converted to McMansion developments, it all led to this moment. But understanding the enemy's true scope also revealed their fatal arrogance. They documented everything, thinking corporate shells and fake authority protected them from consequences. Time to prove them catastrophically wrong and end their agricultural terrorism permanently. The War Council assembling in my tasting room looked like a scene from The Magnificent Seven, if The Magnificent Seven featured pissed-off farmers instead of gunfighters. Sarah had called everyone while I processed the scope of our enemy. Not just Thornfield, but a systematic agricultural terrorism campaign that had already butchered 16 family operations across 3 counties. Jack Patterson arrived with briefcase full of legal napalm and the focused intensity of a prosecutor who'd found his white whale. Federal civil rights violations, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and RICO enterprise charges, he announced, spreading documents across my tasting room table that still carried the sweet residue of last week's harvest prep. But the coalition that shocked me was the survivors, farm families who'd lost everything to Valley Vista's destruction machine and were hungry for revenge. Elena Rodriguez sat across from me, 70-year-old hands that had milked cows for 4 decades, now trembling with rage instead of arthritis. They murdered my dairy with fake health violations and legal fees that ate our savings, she said. Forced sale at 60% below market just to avoid bankruptcy. Tom Kowalski's apple orchard had become Orchard View Manor after 18 months of regulatory hell. Identical pattern, he confirmed. Anonymous complaints, government harassment, legal costs that consumed 3 generations of profit until selling became survival. The room smelled like aged oak and righteous anger as we planned Valley Vista's destruction. Sarah coordinated the documentation nuclear option, every embezzled dollar, fraudulent survey, and fake complaint compiled into federal evidence with timestamps, witnesses, and paper trails that could choke a courthouse. Credit union fraud training taught me to follow money through shell companies, she explained, pulling up bank records that connected premium property solutions to Valley Vista through 6 corporate layers. Every suspicious transfer, every inflated invoice, we're building evidence that proves criminal conspiracy beyond reasonable doubt. Jack prepared the legal massacre, federal civil rights lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, which strips governmental immunity from anyone operating under false authority. Since HOAs acting outside their jurisdiction lose legal protection, individual board members face personal asset seizure for every violation. This is something every property owner should know. When HOA boards operate beyond their legal boundaries, they lose immunity protection and become personally liable for damages up to $50,000 per incident under federal civil rights law. Thornfield's house, Tesla, bank accounts, everything becomes collectible under federal judgment, Jack explained with predatory satisfaction. She used fake authority to terrorize families for corporate profit. Federal law treats that as civil rights terrorism with personal financial consequences. Maria Santos from Wine Country Weekly had been investigating development corruption for 2 years, and our case was her smoking gun. Wine Country Under Attack: How Development Cartels Steal Family Farms Through HOA Terrorism, would run simultaneously in 12 publications, complete with financial documents and victim testimonies. Valley Vista depends on municipal cooperation for development permits, Maria explained. Bad publicity destroys municipal relationships faster than legal delays. Public shame kills development projects when legal pressure hits bureaucratic roadblocks. But our secret weapon was the agricultural protection network Valley Vista had accidentally created by targeting so many family operations. California Farm Bureau Legal Defense Fund offered unlimited financial backing for systematic harassment test cases. Environmental groups pledged public opposition to farmland conversion. Restaurant associations throughout the Bay Area committed to boycotting developments built on destroyed heritage farms. The tactical timeline was brutal and beautiful. Day 1. Jack files federal civil rights complaint with asset seizure motions targeting Thornfield's personal property. Elena and Tom join as co-plaintiffs representing pattern victims. Day 2. Maria's exposé publishes simultaneously across Wine Country media, documenting Valley Vista's systematic agricultural terrorism with financial evidence and victim testimonies. Day 3. Sheriff's Department serves search warrants for HOA records based on federal fraud investigation. State Attorney General opens criminal probe into embezzlement and conspiracy charges. Day 4. My harvest begins under federal protection order, with media documenting family agriculture surviving corporate attack. Here's what they never expected, Antonio Rossetti said, gesturing around the room at farmers, attorneys, journalists, and restaurant owners united by shared outrage. Every family they destroyed becomes evidence of pattern fraud. Every farm they bulldozed creates another federal witness. The evening air carried the intoxicating sweetness of grapes, approaching perfect sugar levels. 4 days until harvest, that would happen whether Thornfield liked it or not. But now it represented something bigger than family legacy. Proof that American agriculture could survive corporate terrorism. Elena Rodriguez looked across the table with eyes that had watched her heritage become suburban sprawl. Marcus, we couldn't stop them individually, but collectively, let's make sure no other family loses their legacy to these development vultures. Tom Kowalski nodded, calloused hands clenched into fists that had picked 10 million apples before lawyers picked his bank account clean. They counted on us staying isolated and ashamed. Time to show them what organized farmers can accomplish. Standing in the tasting room, my grandfather would have died defending, surrounded by people who understood what we were really fighting for. I felt complete confidence in our team and absolute clarity about the mission. Valley Vista Development had systematically destroyed American family agriculture for corporate profit. Time to show them what happens when farmers stop retreating and start advancing together. The hunt was about to become the hunted. Thornfield's response to our legal mobilization was swift, desperate, and absolutely insane, even by her standards. At exactly 6:47 a.m., 3 days before my harvest was scheduled to begin, armed security guards rolled up my driveway in a black tactical vehicle that looked like it belonged in Fallujah, not wine country. I was checking sugar levels in my Cabernet clusters when boots started crunching through rows that had never seen violence in 79 years. The morning fog still clung to grape leaves when 3 uniformed men with visible sidearms marched toward my crush pad like an occupying army. Marcus Finley? The lead guard was built like a linebacker and carried himself with the rigid posture of ex-military gone corporate. We have authorization for immediate structural removal and property securing. The paperwork he shoved in my face was thick, official-looking, and complete bullshit. Emergency enforcement order from something called Elite Property Protection Services, claiming court authorization for hazardous structure removal and area security pending litigation resolution. Court authorization from which court? I asked, keeping my voice level while my hands stayed visible. Marine training. When facing armed confrontation, document everything and avoid escalation until you understand the tactical situation. Ma'am said you'd be difficult, the second guard replied, hand resting on his holster with practiced intimidation. We're here to secure dangerous structures before someone gets hurt. The third guard was already photographing my family home, tasting room, and crush equipment with professional surveillance gear. License plates, serial numbers, structural details, comprehensive intelligence gathering that screamed lawsuit preparation. But here's where Thornfield made her first critical tactical error. My security cameras were recording everything, and I'd activated the emergency notification system Jake Morrison had installed after the surveyor incident. Gentlemen, I'm going to call my attorney to verify your court authorization, I announced, pulling out my phone while maintaining visual contact with all three guards. Standard procedure when dealing with legal enforcement. Sir, step away from the communication device, the lead guard ordered, moving his hand toward his weapon. This is official business. Interference with legal proceedings is a criminal offense. That's when I knew these weren't real law enforcement officers. They were hired muscle, pretending to have authority they didn't possess. Jake, I said into my phone as Deputy Sheriff Morrison answered on the first ring. 3 armed men claiming court authorization are threatening to demolish my tasting room. Can you verify their legal standing? The guard's body language shifted immediately. Professional intimidators recognize real law enforcement backup when they hear it. Marcus, keep them talking. Jake's voice carried clearly through speakerphone. I'm en route with backup. Document everything they say about court orders and legal authorization. That's when the lead guard's radio crackled. Unit 7, what's your status on the Finley property situation? Encountering resistance, he replied. Subject refuses to comply with removal orders. The voice that came back through the radio made my blood freeze. Delilah Thornfield herself, coordinating armed intimidation from a safe distance, like a mafia boss directing street muscle. Maintain pressure until compliance or arrival of actual law enforcement, her voice commanded. Priority is documentation of refusal to cooperate with legal proceedings. The mini twist that changed everything happened when Elite Property Protection Services owner Randy Kowalski, yes, related to Tom from our war council, called my phone directly. Mr. Finley, this is Randy Kowalski from Elite Protection. His voice carried panic and genuine regret. I need to apologize profusely. My men are operating under completely false pretenses. Randy explained that Thornfield had hired his company, claiming she held property management authority for disputed boundary areas. She'd presented fake court documents and offered bonus payments for aggressive enforcement of property securing. My guys have no legal authority whatsoever, Randy continued while his 3 employees stood in my vineyard, looking increasingly uncomfortable. She lied about having court orders, property authority, everything. We're in serious legal jeopardy for unlawful enforcement. The sound of sirens approaching through morning mist announced Jake's arrival with backup. 3 county patrol cars and 1 federal vehicle, FBI Agricultural Crime Unit, had been monitoring Valley Vista's activities since our federal complaint filing. Here's what happens next. Randy's voice carried the weight of someone realizing he'd been played. My men withdraw immediately, and I'm providing written statements about every misrepresentation Thornfield made when hiring us. She committed conspiracy to impersonate legal authority, and my company's cooperation with law enforcement starts now. The guards were already retreating toward their tactical vehicle when Jake and FBI agent Patricia Valdez arrived with enough backup to arrest a small army. The smell of morning dew on grape clusters mixed with diesel exhaust from law enforcement vehicles as Thornfield's intimidation campaign collapsed into federal evidence. Elite Protection is completely cooperating with federal investigation, Agent Valdez announced after interviewing the security guards. Hiring armed personnel under false authority constitutes federal conspiracy charges with mandatory minimum sentences. Standing among vines that had survived everything California could throw at them, Watching federal agents document Thornfield's latest crime, I realized the tide had finally turned completely. She'd just provided federal prosecutors with armed conspiracy charges to add to embezzlement, fraud, and civil rights violations. 3 days until harvest, and justice was ripening faster than my grapes. Thornfield's final, desperate gambit was so unhinged it would have been comical if it weren't potentially career-destroying for my family. With federal agents crawling through her financial records and armed security debacle making headlines, she decided to go nuclear on my reputation. The character assassination campaign launched 48 hours before harvest, with the coordination of a military strike and the ethics of a rabid wolverine. Social media exploded first. Thornfield's Facebook post at 6 a.m. claimed I was a dangerous military extremist who threatened neighborhood families with agricultural weapons, complete with doctored photos showing me holding pruning shears next to ominous text about violent responses to community concerns. By noon, she'd filed an emergency restraining order application, claiming credible fear for personal safety, based on my alleged threats during the armed security confrontation. Never mind that my own security cameras proved I'd never left my property or raised my voice above conversational level. The local news tip was pure malicious genius. Veteran winery owner under investigation for alcohol distribution violations and threats against neighbors. She'd contacted Channel 7, claiming federal agents were investigating my operation for illegal alcohol sales and intimidation of community leaders. But Thornfield's masterpiece was the community safety meeting she organized for that evening in the HOA clubhouse. Flyers posted throughout 3 neighborhoods warned about the dangerous individual operating an unlicensed alcohol facility adjacent to family homes. The meeting would have been hilarious if it weren't so potentially damaging to everything my family had built over 3 generations. Sarah and I arrived 40 minutes early to find the clubhouse parking lot already half full. But instead of angry neighbors demanding my removal, we discovered something beautiful, a rebellion brewing inside Thornfield's own kingdom. HOA members had finally received the financial audit they'd been demanding for 18 months. $485,000 in debt, $200,000 in fraudulent contracts, and embezzlement evidence that would make Bernie Madoff proud. "She's been stealing our money to pay lawyers harassing neighbors," announced Patricia Walsh, recent HOA board member who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about premium property solutions for months. Every fake complaint, every fraudulent lawsuit, funded with our community dues. The mini twist that destroyed Thornfield's final play came from her own neighbors, who'd spent the afternoon connecting dots between missing HOA funds and escalating legal warfare against surrounding properties. "We hired an independent accountant after seeing federal investigation reports," explained Robert Finley, no relation, despite sharing my last name. "Every contract she approved goes to companies she secretly owns. She's been embezzling community funds to finance personal vendettas." When Thornfield arrived for her safety meeting, she found 60-plus homeowners demanding her immediate resignation and criminal prosecution. The woman who'd terrorized my family for months walked into her own political execution. Delilah Thornfield has violated fiduciary duty, committed embezzlement, and used our money to harass innocent families, Patricia announced to Channel 7 cameras that had showed up expecting to film my character assassination. This board votes unanimously for her immediate removal and full cooperation with federal investigation. But the television coverage that was supposed to destroy my reputation became Thornfield's public downfall instead. Maria Santos from Wine Country Weekly had tipped off investigative reporters about the development conspiracy story breaking that evening. HOA president embezzles funds to finance harassment campaign against family farms. Made the 11 p.m. news with footage of Thornfield screaming about government conspiracy while storming out of her own community meeting. The federal response was swift and devastating. Agent Valdez called that night with news that made Sarah literally dance around our kitchen. Emergency asset seizure order approved for all Thornfield personal property pending federal fraud trial. House, vehicles, bank accounts, everything frozen until restitution determination. My security cameras had disproven every allegation Thornfield made. FBI surveillance of her communications revealed coordination with Valley Vista Development throughout the harassment campaign. Most damning, recorded phone calls discussing elimination of Finley property obstacle through maximum pressure tactics. The sweet smell of harvest-ready grapes drifted through our bedroom windows as Sarah read federal charging documents. Conspiracy to violate civil rights, wire fraud, embezzlement of community funds, filing false police reports, and criminal conspiracy to deprive property rights under color of law. Each count carries 5 to 10 years federal prison time, Sarah explained, her voice warm with satisfaction, plus complete financial restitution to all harassment victims. But the most beautiful development was community response. Instead of fearing the dangerous veteran, neighbors from 6 subdivisions signed letters supporting our family and demanding prosecution of development company terrorism. My daughter Zoe knocked on our bedroom door at midnight. "Dad, Channel 7 wants to interview you tomorrow about surviving corporate harassment campaigns. They're calling you a hero for exposing systematic attacks on family agriculture." Standing at our window overlooking vines my grandfather planted with Purple Heart money, I realized Thornfield's final attack had backfired completely. Instead of destroying my reputation, she'd exposed herself as the criminal she'd always been and unified an entire community against development company terrorism. Tomorrow's harvest would happen under media protection, federal investigation coverage, and community support that turned family legacy into regional symbol of agricultural survival. Thornfield wanted character assassination. She got career suicide instead. Ready for me to continue with the public climax? The county supervisor's emergency hearing looked like something between a criminal trial and a public execution, with Delilah Thornfield playing the starring role of both defendant and condemned. The courthouse chamber was packed beyond fire code capacity. Local TV crews, newspaper reporters, agricultural families from 5 counties, HOA residents demanding justice, and federal agents documenting everything for criminal prosecution. Standing room only, with overflow crowds watching live streams from the courthouse steps. Thornfield arrived in a rental car. Her Tesla had been seized by federal marshals that morning, accompanied by an expensive attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Her face carried the haunted pallor of someone watching their entire life collapse in real time. I took the podium with Sarah, Jack Patterson, and 3 bankers' boxes of evidence that represented 6 months of systematic harassment, documented down to the minute. The sweet autumn air drifting through courthouse windows carried the scent of grape harvest happening throughout the valley, including mine, which had started that morning under federal protection. Honorable supervisors, my name is Marcus Finley, and I represent the 3rd generation of my family to farm 12 acres of vineyard that has been continuously in agricultural production since 1943, I began, my voice carrying clearly through speakers to the overflow crowd outside. 6 months ago, Delilah Thornfield began a systematic campaign to force my family from our land through legal harassment, financial terrorism, and ultimately armed intimidation, all funded by embezzled HOA money and coordinated with Valley Vista Development Corp. To convert family farms into suburban subdivisions. I displayed the original 1943 land grant on courthouse screens, showing agricultural protection language that predated every subdivision in 3 counties. The property deed that smelled like old leather and family sweat, now projected for hundreds of witnesses to see. This document proves my vineyard has never been subject to HOA authority and never will be. Ms. Thornfield knew this when she hired lawyers to harass us. She knew this when she filed false complaints with government agencies. She knew this when she hired armed guards to terrorize my family during harvest season. The evidence presentation was methodical and devastating. Bank records showing embezzlement, recorded phone calls coordinating with development companies, false police reports documented by federal investigation, and surveillance footage disproving every allegation Thornfield had made. But the moment that broke her came when Elena Rodriguez took the microphone. My family operated Rodriguez Dairy for 42 years, until Thornfield's harassment campaign forced us into bankruptcy, Elena announced, her voice trembling with controlled rage. Same lawyers, same false complaints, same development company buyout after we lost everything to legal fees. Tom Kowalski followed. Kowalski Apple Orchard, destroyed by identical tactics. 38 years of family heritage bulldozed for McMansions because we couldn't afford to fight systematic legal warfare. 6 additional families testified about harassment campaigns that followed identical patterns. Anonymous complaints, regulatory pressure, escalating legal costs, forced sales below market value, and immediate conversion to luxury developments. County Attorney Margaret Foster presented the federal investigation findings with prosecutorial precision. HOA operated completely outside legal jurisdiction, federal civil rights violation, pattern fraud targeting agricultural families, RICO enterprise charges, embezzlement of community funds exceeding $500,000, federal wire fraud, armed intimidation under false authority, conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. When given the opportunity to respond, Thornfield's attorney tried damage control. My client acted in good faith to protect community property values and resolve legitimate neighbor disputes through proper legal channels. That's when I delivered the mic drop moment that ended her criminal career and probably my speaking career. "Ms. Thornfield," I said, standing and addressing her directly while cameras rolled and federal agents took notes. "You embezzled community money to pay lawyers to harass families whose only crime was owning land you wanted to steal. You hired armed guards to terrorize a veteran and his family during harvest season. You filed false police reports to criminalize legitimate agricultural operations. You conspired with development companies to destroy generational family farms for corporate profit." The chamber fell silent, except for the distant sound of court reporters typing and protesters outside demanding justice. In Afghanistan, we had a name for people who used fake authority to terrorize innocent families for money. We called them war criminals. The only difference between you and them is geography. The county board's unanimous decision was swift and comprehensive. $100,000 fine against Grandview Estates HOA for civil rights violations. Criminal referral for Thornfield on 16 felony charges. New agricultural protection ordinance preventing HOA overreach. And county-sponsored legal aid for all harassment victims. Board Chairman William Foster read the final resolution. Sonoma County hereby declares that family agriculture takes precedence over subdivision expansion, and any attempt to use harassment or intimidation against heritage farms will face the full weight of county prosecution and federal civil rights enforcement. The courthouse erupted in sustained applause that lasted 5 minutes. Thornfield walked out in handcuffs, her attorney shaking his head and muttering about unwinnable cases and criminal clients. Standing in courthouse chambers where my family's legacy had been officially protected and our tormentor officially destroyed, I felt the satisfaction of complete victory and absolute justice. Ready for me to continue with the resolution, plus epilogue? 6 months after Delilah Thornfield was sentenced to 8 years federal prison and ordered to pay $750,000 in restitution, my vineyard had become something I never expected. A symbol of resistance against corporate agriculture terrorism. The immediate aftermath was swift and satisfying. Thornfield's assets, house, cars, investment accounts, were liquidated to pay damages to every family her conspiracy had destroyed. Elena Rodriguez used her settlement to restart a small, organic dairy operation. Tom Kowalski bought back part of his original apple orchard from the subdivision developers who suddenly wanted nothing to do with controversial land. Valley Vista Development Corp. Collapsed within 3 months under federal investigation, criminal prosecutions, and public boycotts that made their projects unsellable. Turns out, systematic harassment of family farms wasn't great for corporate public relations. But the personal transformation was even more meaningful. Sarah completed her law degree and now specializes in agricultural protection law, helping farm families fight harassment campaigns before they escalate to federal crimes. Her first case victory, stopping a nearly identical HOA conspiracy in Napa County before it destroyed another generational vineyard. Zoe graduated high school early and started UC Davis Agricultural Science with a full scholarship from the Heritage Farm Protection Foundation, the organization we established with our legal settlement money. She's developing sustainable viticulture techniques that help family operations compete with corporate agriculture while preserving soil for future generations. The foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined. Annual scholarships for military veterans entering agriculture, legal defense fund for farmers facing development harassment, community-supported agriculture program connecting heritage farms with suburban families who want to support local food systems instead of destroying them. But our crown jewel is the annual Harvest Heritage Festival, held every October on our vineyard to celebrate family agriculture and educate the public about development threats facing rural communities. This year's festival drew over 5,000 visitors who came to support heritage farming, taste wines from family operations throughout 3 counties, and learn about agricultural protection laws that every rural property owner should understand. Local restaurants featured dishes made entirely from heritage farm ingredients. Environmental groups set up booths explaining why preserving farmland matters for climate sustainability. The most meaningful moment came when County Supervisor William Foster presented the Marcus Finley Agricultural Protection Act, legislation strengthening right-to-farm protections and establishing criminal penalties for systematic harassment of family agricultural operations. No family should have to fight federal court battles to protect heritage farms from corporate terrorism, Foster announced to festival crowds, while my grandfather's original vines provided backdrop. This legislation ensures agricultural operations receive the same protection as other constitutional rights. 3 technical lessons emerged that every property owner should remember. First, agricultural properties with pre-existing operations cannot be retroactively regulated by residential developments. Existing farms maintain legal priority over new subdivisions. Second, HOAs operating outside their jurisdiction lose immunity protection and face personal liability for damages under federal civil rights law. Third, pattern harassment targeting specific demographic groups constitutes federal conspiracy charges with mandatory prison sentences. The personal healing was slower but deeper. Family dinners under our tasting room pergola taste different now, seasoned with the knowledge that we earned the right to enjoy them through legal warfare rather than inheritance alone. The morning routine of checking grape sugar levels carries additional sweetness, knowing these vines survive not just drought and market fluctuations, but systematic corporate attempts to destroy them. My grandfather's memorial plaque now sits beside the original 1943 plantings, with an inscription that reads, "These vines survived war, depression, and corporate terrorism because some legacies are worth defending with everything you have." Last month, Maria Santos won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series, documenting development company harassment of family farms throughout California. Her work sparked legislative reforms in 12 states and FBI task forces targeting agricultural terrorism in rural communities nationwide. But sitting on my porch this evening, watching sunset paint my vineyard gold, while wind chimes play music from the pergola that started this whole war, I think my grandfather would be most proud of something simpler. We kept the family legacy alive. We protected our community from predators, and we proved that ordinary people can defeat corporate criminals when they refuse to be intimidated. The sweet smell of fermenting wine from our crush pad mixes with wood smoke from neighbors' chimneys and distant laughter from harvest workers finishing another successful season. Sometimes justice tastes like victory. Sometimes it tastes like home. Tonight, it tastes like both. Share your HOA horror story in the comments below. Your experience might help another family stand up to bullies with clipboards. And if this story inspired you to support family agriculture over corporate development, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community that refuses to let petty tyrants destroy American farming heritage.